In this video, we will create a realistic gemstone. For this, we will first add normal map details to our surface, then explore volumetric translucency effects, and finally add some procedural displacement to our model. So in this video here, we're going to be building the shader for this gemstone. And once you understand how this works, you will see it's actually going to be quite easy. So our shader has to have certain kind of requirements. We have more thinner parts of our gemstone up here, and those parts should be more transparent. We should have less colors in here, and we can almost see entirely through the whole gemstone. But the lower we go here, the thicker our gemstone gets, and we have more this kind of translucent effect. We have these colors that are introduced and so on. And then we also have this kind of like stone connection down here. We're going to be building all of this, as you can see in a moment. As always, you can find all of my scene files from all of my tutorials on my Patreon, together with a whole course on car rendering and lots of other additional goodies. So check this out if that's interesting for you. Otherwise, let's see how the shader for this gemstone was done. So this one right here would be our starting point. And as you can see, we have this very low-res model here of this stone. It's nothing really fancy. And the only thing that I did was to prepare a UV map. And instead of using the map channel 1, I used the map channel 2 because map channel 1 already has the UVs for this stone asset in here. So I just generated a new planar UV, put this in map channel 2. And the reason why I have this UV is that I just need a UV to mask out my gemstone here from top to bottom. And we're going to be using this later, as you can see. So that's the only thing that I prepared. And now we'll switch to the slate material editor so that we can understand better what's going on in here. So in my slate editor, I have a bunch of stuff prepared already. We have the shader that at the moment just has this gray diffuse color in here, nothing else. And then I just prepared two texture maps. One would be the normal map for this stone in here. And then I have just this generic stone texture. So as a first step, let's just increase our refractions all the way to 100%, so a pure white color. Once we do this, you can see that our diffuse color here has no effect anymore. I could just put it to this completely red color. It wouldn't really show up because we have 100% refractions in here. At the moment, we don't really have any reflections, and let's dial them in later. Let's work first on our refractions in here. So inside here, you can see that we have now the refractions of the environment that I set up for the scene. But at the moment, it looks very bad and very basic. And that's mainly because our geometry here is super simplistic. And we can easily eliminate this by just loading the normal map of our stone, which are then piped in this Vray normal map node, which are then gonna connect into the bump slot of this shader in here. Once I do this, you can see we have a much nicer result already. So just by adding some details in our normals, this looks already much better. And with the intensity here, you can define how strong your normal map shows up. So I will put this to a value of 100. And I want you to pay attention to how blurry the refractions appear. And that's even though we have the glossiness here set to 1, so no glossiness in our refractions. But because we introduce a normal map, we have all of these details here on the surface. And this has basically the same effect as if we would lower the glossiness. So the stronger you have your bump map, the more blurry your refractions look like. In our case, let's use a value of 50. Because I still want to have the appearance that some part look very clear, and by lowering the normal map intensity, we have less overall blurriness in the refractions. So now let's introduce the most important aspect of our shader, and that's going to be the translucency. So at the moment, this one here is set to none, and there's two different modes, volumetric and subsurface scattering. And subsurface scattering is more suitable for skin, which we're not going to discuss in this video. I have our own dedicated video that you can find in my channel. So we're going to be using the volumetric mode in here. So once you enable this, you can see it exactly looks the same. And that's why we have to play with the different parameters in here. And let's start with the fog color. So using the fog color, you can control the attenuation of the light. So you can define how transparent an object appears depending on its thickness, so that thinner parts of the object appear more transparent than thicker parts of the object. So this value can be extremely sensitive depending on the scale of your object. So you can see I even just play a little bit with it. We already have a very drastic effect. And in order to reduce the intensity of this effect, you can raise the depth here. So let's just temporarily raise this to 100, and then we can more clearly understand what is happening. So you can see the more I lower this value in here, the more the light is scattered in our object and the more solid it basically appears. So if I go very low, you can see it almost has the appearance of snow now. The more lower I go, the more opaque it basically becomes. And the more I have this value here close to white, the more I can see through and the more, let's say, refractive it actually looks like. So this basically can give you some quite nice results. And as said, if you want to build some snow shader or some ice shader, this is basically how you would do it. In our case, we don't want to really use a simple numeric value in here. Let's just use a gradient ramp. And that's why I added this UVW map here before with the map channel of 2. So let's go inside here and also use the map channel of 2. And now I can have localized fog color. So at the top, which would be the very right here of my ramp, we will have it completely transparent. And the more lower I go, the more opaque here our object gets. So let's play around a little bit with the values. Let's put this one, for example, a bit higher. And let's move this down. And then this one, I don't want to be completely black. Maybe something like this in here. And now we can go back and play with our depth. So let's use a depth, for example, of 10, or something like 15, maybe 10 is better. So we can see that we have some transparent part up here. And then the more lower we go, the more we will have this kind of like more solid appearance here of our gemstone. So at the moment, everything is very white, and that's because our scatter color here is set to white. So if I use, for example, this kind of reddish color, you can see that with the scatter color, you can start to introduce colors which are appearing in your object. So the lower our fog color is, the more our scatter color will come into effect. So you can see at those parts up here where our ramp is completely white, the fog color here doesn't really have much of a result. And then the more we have it opaque, the more our scatter color comes into effect. So now instead of using this simple color, let's use a ramp and let's put this into a composite because I want to layer multiple elements here together. So let's open this and I will have here the layer 1 and I can put here also a gradient ramp inside, and then I can also use the map channel 2 and then define different kind of values in here. For example, I can have it red here at the top and then blue at the center and so on. So now I went in and prepared a bunch of maps already in order to make this tutorial not too long. And instead of here the gradient map that we just created, I have this more complex looking gradient ramp with the colors that I want. And let's use this one here instead in our layer 1. We can delete this one in here now. And you can see we immediately have a much more nice looking appearance here of our gemstone. So now let's go in our composite and add a few more layers to make this look a bit more complex. And as a start, I want to use this stone texture that I loaded in earlier. Let's add this as a layer 2. And at the moment, this doesn't really work well because I only want to have this stone effect here appearing at the very bottom. And for this, I have this extra mask prepared, which again also uses the map channel of 2 and just has a gradient like this in here. So now I will go in and map this gradient into the mask of the layer 2. And now you can see we have this kind of stone effect here at the very bottom. And as a last step for our scattering color composite, I want to introduce here a 3D noise texture, which uses here the object's XYZ space. So it's a 3-dimensional texture, and this normally works quite good with these kind of volumetric shaders because it's a 3D texture and it's also affecting here the inside of our object and not only the exterior as with these kind of like ramp textures that we used for the colors in here. So let's use the noise texture and let's put this one into the layer 3 here of our composite. And now let's put this one to overlay mode. And then let's reduce the intensity to something like 30, for example. So we have these kind of like random discolorizations in our gemstone here. And I think like this, it looks a bit more natural. So at the moment we only use the refraction part of our shader. We didn't really start to introduce reflections, so let's change that. Let's put this one here all the way to white. Once we do this, we can see, I think it looks nice, but overall I feel it looks a little bit too bright now. So the way we can counterbalance this is by just going down with the depth here. So let's use some value like 6, for example. You can see once I do this, we will have a more opaque and this way darker appearance here in our zone. Let's go to a value of 4, for example. So we still keep these kind of like transparent parts here at the top, but we have it more opaque here and we overlay this with the reflections. Like this, it doesn't get too bright overall. So as a last step, I want to add some kind of displacement down here because this looks now a bit too simple. So let's add a V-Ray displacement modifier. I will use an amount of 1 centimeter. Let's just put in a simple composite map. Let's drag this into our slate material editor. And what I did here is that I prepared already this simple noise map. You can see it just has some very basic settings in here. And I'm going to take this noise map now and map it into our layer in here. So now we have a lot of displacement on our entire object, and that's of course not what we want. We only want to have this focused in this lower part in here. That's why we need to use a mask again. So let's use this stone mask here as a starting point. Let's just duplicate this. Let's put it here, for example. Let's add this now into the mask of our composite in here. And now you can see we have a lot of details here in our stone, but let's modify this mask a little bit. Let's just move this a tiny bit higher. And now you can see we have all of those details which are going up a little bit higher, and then they are fading out towards the top here. So there you have it. That's as far as I want to push it in this video. As usual, you can always find all of my scene files on my Patreon, together with a whole course on car rendering and lots of other additional goodies. So check this out if that's interesting for you. Otherwise, see you next tutorial. Take care and see you soon.